particular meaning that existed in the blessed and insightful mind of the Imam.
In the quiet halls of an ancient chamber, where the light of flickering lanterns danced upon carved wooden walls, and the air carried the scent of old manuscripts, Ibrahim Traoré found himself sitting across from Ali Khamenei. The room was neither adorned with luxury nor stripped bare of meaning. It was a place where wisdom seemed to breathe from the very walls, where silence had a language of its own. Ibrahim had traveled far, driven by a restless search for truth, and here before him sat a man whose presence seemed both soft and formidable, a figure who carried the weight of centuries of thought upon his shoulders. Khamenei's eyes, sharp yet compassionate, lingered upon the young leader. For a long while he said nothing, only studying him as though reading not just his expression, but his soul. Finally, in a voice both calm and penetrating, he began, "You come seeking Islam, not as a word but as a reality. You have seen the world's noise, the claims of those who shout its name but betray its heart, and you wish to know if there is more than the surface. You want to touch the essence." Ibrahim leaned forward, his face tense with expectation. He had read, he had heard, he had experienced fragments of Islam in his land, in his encounters with its scholars and its followers, but something in him still burned with unanswered questions. "Yes," he said, his voice firm but low. "I want to understand what it truly means. Not what the world says about it. Not what is painted by politics or distorted by power. I want the truth." Khamenei nodded slowly, as though he had heard this request countless times, but still found it worth answering as if for the first time. "Islam," he said, "is not a religion in the shallow sense of a label one carries. Nor is it merely a set of rules imposed upon reluctant souls. It is a mirror, Ibrahim, a mirror that shows you who you are and who you can become. It does not ask you to escape the world, but to return to it transformed. Many fear it because it awakens responsibility, and responsibility is heavier than chains." Ibrahim's eyes narrowed. Responsibility for what? Khamenei's lips curved into a faint smile. "For everything. For the way you breathe, the way you walk, the way you treat your people, the way you hold power. In Islam, nothing is small. Every gesture becomes a seed, either of light or of darkness. To follow Islam is to become conscious that your existence is not isolated. You are part of a vast river that began before you and will flow long after you are gone. Your choices send ripples across that river, and they return to you in ways you cannot always see." The words sank deep into Ibrahim's mind. He had carried guns, marched in battles, and stood against powers that sought to enslave his nation. He understood struggle. He understood sacrifice. But this idea of responsibility stretching into every corner of his being, even into the unseen, unsettled him. "Then why," he asked, "do so many use Islam as a weapon of control, to divide, to oppress? If it is, as you say, why is it stained with blood in the eyes of the world?" The elder's gaze grew heavy, and he sighed deeply. "Because men take the shell and throw away the pearl. They raise the banner of Islam, but empty it of spirit. They forget that Islam is not about domination, but about purification. The Prophet did not come to build an empire of palaces, but to awaken hearts that were asleep. When men forget this, they take his name and build thrones upon it. But Islam itself, the true Islam, remains untouched by their corruption, just as the sky remains pure even when smoke rises from burning cities." Ibrahim felt a chill pass through him. He thought of the many faces of Islam he had seen. Preachers who scolded but did not inspire, leaders who spoke of God but hoarded wealth, fighters who claimed jihad but carried hatred in their eyes. He thought of the confusion of his people, some clinging to faith with trembling hands, others rejecting it in anger. "So how does one find this true Islam?" he asked quietly. Khamenei leaned closer, his voice now a whisper that carried more weight than thunder. "You do not find it in the noise of men, but in the silence of your own heart. When you stand in prayer, stripped of titles and pride, and you feel the presence that sees you, knows you, loves you. That is where Islam begins. The Quran is not a book of slogans. It is a living dialogue. Every verse speaks differently to the one who listens with sincerity. Islam is not outside you, Ibrahim. It is the deepest truth already planted in your soul, waiting to be awakened." For a moment, Ibrahim could not speak. He felt as though something ancient inside him had stirred, as though words he had longed to hear without knowing had finally reached him. He saw flashes of his childhood, the call to prayer echoing in distant villages, the faces of elders who recited verses with trembling lips, the courage of men who fought for justice in the name of God. It was as if a thread connected all these fragments, and now, in this dimly lit chamber, it had been pulled together. Still, doubt lingered, but Islam demands submission, he said. And submission sounds like weakness. My people need strength. How can I lead them if I bow? Khamenei's eyes glimmered. Submission to God is not weakness, Ibrahim. It is the highest strength. When you bow before God, you refuse to bow before tyrants. When you kneel in prayer, you rise unbreakable before oppressors. The world teaches men to submit to wealth, to lust, to fear, to other men's power. Islam teaches you to submit only to the one who owns all power. That submission is freedom. That is why the Prophet's companions, though barefoot and poor, could shake the palaces of empires. They feared no man because they feared only God. The word struck Ibrahim like a blade of light through the fog. He realized that submission in this sense was not slavery but liberation, a fire that burned away chains. His hands tightened as though he were grasping an invisible truth. Khamenei continued, his voice now rising with a quiet passion. Do you know why Islam speaks of justice so often, Ibrahim? Because justice is the fragrance of submission. When a man submits to God, he cannot tolerate oppression, not in his land, not in his home, not even in his own heart. Islam commands you to fight injustice, but not with hatred, with discipline, with mercy, with a strength that knows its source is divine. That is why the Quran calls believers to be witnesses for truth, even if it be against themselves. The young leader lowered his gaze. He thought of the weight of leadership, the temptations of power, the compromises he had already faced. He wondered if he had been as faithful to justice as he had claimed. The elder seemed to read his silence. Ibrahim, Khamenei said softly, your struggle is not only against enemies outside. Your greater jihad is against the tyrant within yourself. The arrogance that whispers, the greed that tempts, the anger that blinds. If you can conquer that, no army on earth can defeat you. But if you lose that battle, even if you conquer nations, you will be hollow. The words pierced him, leaving no refuge for excuses. He realized with sudden clarity that the battlefield within was vaster than any land he could march across. The night grew deeper, but the room seemed brighter. The lanterns flickered, their flames rising as if stirred by unseen winds. Khamenei rose slowly, and Ibrahim followed, standing with a heart both heavy and light. The elder placed a hand upon his shoulder. The night stretched long as Ibrahim Traoré walked slowly through the dim corridors, the sound of his own footsteps echoing faintly against stone. The words he had just heard from Ali Khamenei refused to leave him. They hovered like whispers at the edge of his mind, demanding reflection. He stepped into a courtyard where the sky revealed itself, vast and filled with stars that shimmered like fragments of an eternal book. He tilted his head back and for the first time in many years felt small, not as a weakness but as a truth. The weight of leadership had made him believe he was a pillar holding the destiny of his people. But now, under the gaze of endless stars, he realized he was a servant of something infinitely greater. He turned, and to his surprise, the elder had followed him into the night. Khamenei moved with the grace of someone for whom time had slowed, whose steps were not bound by haste. He stood beside Ibrahim, his hands clasped behind his back, and looked at the same stars. For a long while, neither spoke. Then, in a voice low and thoughtful, Khamenei said, do you know why the Quran often speaks of the heavens? It is to remind man that he is never the center. You see the stars, the galaxies beyond imagination, yet God listens to the whisper in your heart. That is Islam, the balance between humility before the vastness and dignity in being heard by the creator of it all. Ibrahim swallowed hard, his chest tightening with awe. And yet, he said slowly, men behave as if they themselves are gods. I have seen rulers destroy nations for pride, men enslave their brothers for gold. Even in my own land, I have seen how power intoxicates. How does Islam protect a man from that? Khamenei's face grew solemn, by reminding him that power is not ownership, but trust. In Islam, every position, every authority, is an amana, a trust placed upon you by God. You will be asked about it. Every word you spoke to your people, Every decision you signed, every coin you took or gave, it will be placed before you on the day of judgment. That is why true leaders in Islam tremble, not rejoice when they are given power. For they know it is not a crown but a weight. The Prophet said that leadership is a betrayal unless it is carried with justice. And justice, his voice softened, is heavier than mountains. The word struck Ibrahim like the toll of the bell. He had felt the loneliness of power, but not this trembling sense of its sacredness. He thought of his soldiers, the hungry children of his villages, the hopes that clung to his name. He suddenly realized how every careless word, every rash decision, could wound not only bodies but souls. And if I fail, he asked, his voice almost a whisper. Khamenei turned to him fully now, his eyes piercing yet gentle. Then repent. Islam does not demand perfection. It demands sincerity. To err is human, but to persist arrogantly in error is tyranny. When you falter, return to God. Seek forgiveness. Correct yourself. That is strength, not weakness. Even the greatest companions of the Prophet were not without mistakes, but their greatness lay in their humility before God. The night wind rustled the trees around them, carrying the faint scent of jasmine. Ibrahim closed his eyes, breathing it in, feeling as though every word the elder was carving new paths in his soul. He felt both burdened and lightened at once, as though chains were being removed even as responsibilities were added. Khamenei walked slowly toward a stone bench and sat, gesturing for Ibrahim to join him. When they were seated, he continued, Ibrahim, Islam is not only about prayer and fasting, though these are pillars. It is about transformation. Do you know why fasting is prescribed? It is not to starve the body, but to teach the heart discipline, to break the arrogance that whispers, I own myself. Prayer is not ritual for show. It is a meeting with the one who knows you better than you know yourself. Zakat is not taxation. It is purification, reminding you that wealth is never truly yours, that the poor have a right within it. And jihad, much misunderstood, it is not bloodlust but struggle against injustice, against oppression, against the evil in your own breast. Ibrahim listened, every word unraveling misconceptions that had haunted him. And yet, he said, so many who speak of Islam reduce it to rules, punishments, outward forms. Where's the heart? Khamenei's eyes shone with intensity. That is the tragedy of forgetting the spirit. The Prophet said he was sent to perfect character. If Islam does not make a man more just, more compassionate, more patient, then he has missed its essence. The rules exist, yes, but they are not the goal. They are the guardrails that protect the path. The path itself is toward God. Never confuse the road with the destination. The young leader's mind raced. He thought of his people, some drifting away from faith, thinking it chains them, others clinging without understanding, turning it into rigidity. How then do I show them this Islam you speak of? By living it. Khamenei answered simply, if they see in you honesty when others are corrupt, kindness when others are cruel, humility when others are proud, they will know Islam. Preach less with words, more with being. That is the sunnah of the Prophet. He was called Al-Amin, the trustworthy, before he ever preached a verse. His life was his dawah. Ibrahim felt the truth burn within him. He had given speeches, raised flags, promised justice. Yet perhaps the greatest message he could give his people was not in words, but in the quiet integrity of his actions. The elder's gaze softened again, and he spoke in a tone almost fatherly. Do not think Islam asks you to abandon your culture, your identity. It is not a foreign garment to be worn awkwardly. Islam is like water. It takes the shape of the vessel, but purifies it. Your African roots, your traditions of community, of respect for elders, of courage, these are not erased by Islam. They are elevated by it. Islam does not make you less of who you are. It makes you the best of who you are. Something stirred deeply in Ibrahim at those words. He had feared that faith meant erasing his heritage, that it demanded uniformity that suffocated diversity. But now he saw a vision of Islam as a vast garden, where cultures were flowers nourished by the same water. Khamenei leaned back, his voice now quieter, almost meditative. And remember, Ibrahim, Islam is not for one race, one tribe, one nation. It is for all humanity. That is why the Quran addresses mankind, not just Muslims. It calls to the heart, not to the blood. When you lead, Do not see your people only as Muslims or non-Muslims, but as human beings entrusted to your care. Justice is not only for those who share your faith. It is for all. The Prophet stood for the rights of even those who opposed him. This is why Islam endures, because it speaks the universal, not the narrow. The courtyard grew silent again, but Ibrahim felt as though the silence itself was speaking. He thought of his enemies, those who slandered him, those who sought his downfall. Could he see them as human first? Could he balance justice with mercy? These questions swirled, demanding answers not in theory but in life. Finally, Khamenei rose once more. His figure, though aged, carried a dignity that seemed unshakable. He placed his hand again upon Ibrahim's shoulder, steady and firm. You ask what Islam truly is. It is surrender, yes, but surrender that empowers. It is discipline, yes, but discipline that frees.